Welcome to this First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's Principal Settlement Claim Form walkthrough video. This video is for a representative of a removed child family class member who is a caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent who has died. This video was created to help guide you step by step as you fill out your claim form. If you are submitting for yourself or on behalf of a living caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent who is a person under disability, you need to fill out Claim Form C, not this claim form. Before we get started, there are a couple of things you should know about. Filling out a claim form can be an emotional experience, bringing up a lot of memories. You don't have to fill it out all at one time. You can take breaks and come back to things as you feel ready. If you need additional help, you can call the administrator. They can answer your questions or connect you with a claims helper. The deceased person may be eligible as both a removed child and a caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. If that is the case, just know you'll need to fill out separate forms for each of those classes. If you feel you need wellness or mental health support, you can reach out to someone through these free services anytime, which are available 24 hours a day. All right, let's start your claim form. This is Claim Form D for a caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent who has died. Let's start by defining who may be eligible as a caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent under the settlement. It includes a biological or adoptive parent, or a biological or adoptive grandparent, or a step-parent who is First Nations. A deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent must have lived with, assumed, and exercised parental responsibilities over the removed child at the time of the child's removal. And they must be the one from whom the removed child was first removed. Foster parents are not eligible under the settlement agreement. The following information may bring up difficult emotions. Please reach out to the wellness and mental health supports available. Caregiving parents and caregiving grandparents who committed abuse as defined by the settlement agreement that led to the removal of the child are not eligible for compensation in relation to that child. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the administrator. Let's talk about the definition of a removed child. A removed child is someone who is a First Nations person and was removed from their home as a child. Someone under the age of majority, while the child or their caregiving parents or caregiving grandparents were ordinarily resident on reserve in Canada or anywhere in the Yukon. This means the child's caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent were living on reserve most of the year. If this doesn't describe the experience of the person you are completing the claim for, or you want more information about the various definitions, visit fnchildclaims.ca, and we will explain exactly what age of majority means a little bit later on in the video. A removed child is also someone who was placed into care by child welfare authorities between April 1, 1991 and March 31, 2022. The removed child's placement must have been funded by Indigenous Services Canada. Removals from the Northwest Territories and Nunavut are not covered under this settlement agreement. The caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent may have lived in Northwest Territories or Nunavut later in their life, but will not be eligible if the child was removed while they were ordinarily resident in those territories. To learn more about eligibility requirements, you can use the eligibility information tool at fnchildclaims.ca or call the administrator. For deceased caregiving parents or caregiving grandparents, claims must be submitted by March 10, 2028. If the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent was under the age of majority on March 10, 2025, the claims deadline is 3 years from their date of death. The age of majority varies by province and territory. In some cases, it is 18, and in other areas, it is 19. You will need to check to make sure which applies to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. As you can see, there are multiple deadlines depending on your situation. If you have any questions, reach out to the administrator and make sure you don't miss your deadline. If you feel all of the requirements are met, let's start filling out the claim form. The form officially starts on page 2. Part 1 is for information about the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. Part 2 is contact information for you, the representative. This includes the address and other contact information for the administrator to reach you. Part 3 provides instructions on the valid identification for the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent you will need to submit with this claim. Part 4 is signed and dated by the person completing the claim, in this case, you as the representative. Part 5 is a section specifically for you, the representative. There are different sections of this part depending on the type of representative you are and if there is a grant of authority in place. More information is provided later in this video. Part 6 is where you would provide information about the child or children removed from the care of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. Part 1 is where you fill in basic information about the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent, like their name, birth name if it's different, and date of birth. Enter the date of birth using the numbers for the month, day, and year the caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent was born, in that order. Make sure the name and date of birth match the ID you will provide in Part 3. If you have their Indian registration number and social insurance number, you can add them too. You can submit without this, but having this information may help the administrator process the claim. Part 2 is where you provide your contact information as the representative. This is where you include your name, your mailing address, and mobile, home, and office phone numbers, including the extension if there is one. Providing these numbers as well as an email address will help the administrator contact you, especially if you move. If you are a representative who has been appointed to represent the claimant as part of your job, for example, a public guardian or trustee, you need to provide the name of the organization you work for. Your contact info is even more important if your mailing address listed here is temporary. For example, if you are staying in a correctional or medical facility or a public place like a hotel or friendship center. In some cases, you may be staying with someone and are using their address. If this describes your situation, please be sure to add the name of the place where you are staying. Even if you are staying with a family member, please add their name to help the administrator get in touch with you if it's needed. And if your contact information changes, please call the administrator right away. This is important because if the administrator can't reach you, there could be delays in processing your claim and receiving your compensation. Part 3 of the form asks you to attach some form of government-issued identification for the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. Accepted ID includes anything on this list. While you only need one piece of ID, it is a good idea to provide multiple pieces to make it easier to confirm the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent's identity. You can find a full list of accepted ID at fnchildclaims.ca/identification. Attach a photocopy, scan, or photo of the identification. Never send the originals. Now we'll move to Part 4, which is a privacy release and acknowledgement. Your privacy is important, and the administrator is committed to protecting the information you provide. That said, processing a claim may require others to be involved, such as the Government of Canada, your class counsel, a third-party assessor, the Settlement Implementation Committee, claims helpers, and child welfare authorities. In cases with competing claims with other caregiving parents or caregiving grandparents, or multiple people claiming to represent the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent, information may be shared with those representatives if required under the claims process. It is important that you read this page carefully and make sure you are comfortable with what it says. By signing Part 4, you are acknowledging and agreeing that, in certain circumstances, the administrator or child welfare authorities may need to share your information to process your claim. You are also acknowledging that the administrator, claims helpers, and third-party assessors don't represent Canada or provide legal advice, and that the information you are providing is true to the best of your knowledge. You also understand you might be asked for additional information needed to process your claim. It is very important to sign and date your claim form. An unsigned or undated form will lead to delays in the administrator's ability to review your claim. The form needs to be signed. If you do have questions, you can contact the administrator at no cost. When it comes to Part 5, how you complete it depends on your role as a representative. To act as a representative, you are either legally appointed by a grant of authority or you are the heir, a family member. A grant of authority is a document that names you the estate executor or estate administrator. It's your proof that you have legal authority to receive compensation on behalf of the estate of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent if they are eligible. This can be a will or notarial will in Quebec, a grant of probate issued by a provincial or territorial court order, or a grant of administration letter issued by the Government of Canada. For example, from Indigenous and Northern Affairs Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, or Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. If that describes you and your role, you'll need to provide the following information with the completed claim form: a copy of the grant of authority document that shows your appointment as representative, executor, or administrator of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent's estate, the type of heir who may be eligible to represent a deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent depends on the circumstances of the claim. This could be the highest priority living heir, where the order of priority is outlined in the settlement agreement as spouse, children, grandchildren, parents, siblings, grandparents, or this could be children of caregiving parents or the grandchildren of caregiving grandparents. The administrator will make this assessment based on information available in the claim form. No matter what your role as a representative, you will need to provide a copy of your valid ID with the claim form. This would be a scan, photocopy, or photo of your government-issued ID that matches the name you provided in Part 2 of the form. Next, you will need to provide evidence of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent's date of death. This could be a scan, photocopy, or photo of a death certificate, a funeral director's statement of death, or a burial certificate. Next, you will need to answer whether or not a grant of authority is in place. If, to the best of your knowledge, there is no grant of authority, that means the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent died without leaving a will or appointing an executor, administrator, or trustee for their estate. Check the No box. If there is a grant of authority, check the Yes box and attach a copy of the supporting documents. The administrator also needs to know if you are a family member of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. If you are, please check Yes and fill out the next page. If you are not a family member, check No and fill in the nature of your relationship, to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. If you're a family member, you'll need to fill out the rest of Part 5 of the form. If you're not a family member, you can skip to Part 6. First, you will need to identify how you are related to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. Check the box that represents your relationship. For example, if you are the brother of the deceased person, you would check the box next to sibling. Then, and only if it applies, fill in the number and full names of the other living family members in each of the categories. After that, you'll need to provide evidence of your relationship to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. If you're First Nations and have a biological relationship to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent, you'll be asked to provide your Indian registration number and your date of birth. The administrator will use this information to attempt to confirm your relationship. But if you aren't First Nations or not biologically related to the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent, you'll need to provide evidence of your relationship using documents like a long-form birth certificate that names the biological parents and children, verifiable provincial, territorial, or custom adoption papers, marriage documents, or evidence of common law relationship, or another type of document that confirms your relationship. There are two types of deceased caregiving parents or caregiving grandparents who may be eligible for compensation. Those who had already submitted a claim form prior to death, or those who had a removed child placed off reserve with non-family anytime between January 1, 2006 and March 31, 2022. If a deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent had a removed child placed off reserve with non-family members who remained in care anytime between January 1, 2006 and March 31, 2022, then their compensation will go to the living children of the caregiving parents and living grandchildren of the caregiving grandparents. Caregiving parents or caregiving grandparents who did not have a removed child placed off reserve with non-family members who remained in care anytime between January 1, 2006 and March 31, 2022 are only eligible for compensation if they submitted a claim form before they died and before their claims deadline. As you can see, there are different situations that might apply. If you have any questions, please call the administrator. As you start Part 6, please note that it's important you fill out the information for each child removed from care. You can copy or photocopy the page as many times as you need. This part can bring up a lot of emotions. Remember, you don't have to fill it out all at one time. You can start, stop, and come back to it later. And if you want to reach out to someone for wellness or mental health support, here are some places you can call, available to you for free 24 hours a day. If you're ready, let's continue. After selecting the role that best describes the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent's relationship to the removed child, you will need to fill out the name of the removed child at the time the child was removed and their date of birth. If you have the removed child's Indian registration number and social insurance number, adding this information can help when the claim is being processed. But if you don't, it's okay. Now, you'll need to provide the information about the child's first removal. You are only asked to provide 3 pieces of information about the removal. The first is the date of removal. Please fill in the month and year the child was removed from the care of the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent. The second is where the child was taken when they were placed in care. Was it on reserve or off reserve? Finally, was the child placed with another family member, such as a parent, step-parent, grandparent, sibling, aunt, uncle, or first cousin? Depending on the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent's relationship to the child, you may need to provide evidence of how they are related. If the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent were First Nations and the biological parent or grandparent of the removed child, you do not need to submit additional supporting documentation with this claim form, at least not right now. The administrator will confirm the relationship or contact you for supporting documentation if they need it. If the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent was not First Nations or was not the biological parent or grandparent of the removed child, you will need to provide evidence of their relationship. This could include a long-form birth certificate, adoption papers, marriage documents, or evidence of common law relationship. Contact the administrator if you have any questions. The final page in the form provides space for a second removed child's information. If you have a second removed child to add to the claim, you provide the information and, if necessary, documents just as you did for the first child. If you have more than 2 children to add to the claim, you can copy or photocopy the page as many times as you need to. Okay, you've filled out all your information and gathered all your support materials. Now, how do you submit everything? There are 4 ways. The first is online, which is the fastest way to get your claim in. You do this by visiting the online portal at portal.fnchildclaims.ca. You'll create an account and then be directed to submit all claim form information online. Once you have completed all your information, you'll upload a copy of your identification and other documents and submit. The second way is to fill out the PDF claim form online and then either add your digital signature or print it to add your signature and date. You can also print the claim form and complete it by hand. Either way, don't forget to sign and date your claim form at Part 4. After you've completed it, you can sign it and scan it, along with your identification and other documents. You can then email it to claims@admin.fnchildclaims.ca. You can also fax it to 1-416-815-2723. And of course, you can always mail everything to Settlement Administrator, P.O. Box 2500, Station, Maine, Newmarket, Ontario, L3Y 0H9. Please do not courier your claim forms because the administrator cannot accept courier deliveries. The important things are to fill out the claim form completely, include copies of ID or other required documents, sign and date the claim form, and send everything in before the deadline, which depends on how old the deceased caregiving parent or caregiving grandparent was when the claims opened and their date of death. Remember, you don't have to do this by yourself if you don't want to. You can call the administrator with questions, and if you need more support, they can connect you to a claims helper who can provide one-on-one assistance to help you complete your claim form. If you need wellness or mental health support at any time, reach out to Hope for Wellness or the Kids Help phone line. We hope this has been helpful and that you have all the information you need to submit your claim or know where to go if you need additional support.